Okay, so today we're diving into, well, let's face it, the often pretty confusing world of school admissions here in the UK.
Hmm.
You've sent us a real mix of stuff to look at everything from like a local school handbook mention on a village
Yeah,
website
I saw that one.
right through to a big government report on local authorities, a Reddit thread, which we might touch on later, news bits about offer day stress, and even Romesh Ranganesan's troubles with secondary schools.
Hmm.
Plus, some proper guidance from child law advice and an ed tech company, so quite the range.
It really is. And I think for you, the learner, our goal here is to, sift through all this, figure out the main processes, understand the real challenges involved, and basically give you a clear picture without making your head spin.
Exactly. No jargon overload, hopefully. And as always, we've got our expert here to help break it all down and give us that extra context. So, where do we even start? Maybe just the absolute basics of how it usually works. Okay, yeah, let's do that. So for most kids starting primary or secondary, it's what they call the normal admissions round. And the local authorities, the LAs, they're kind of central here. They coordinate it all using a standard form, the Common Application Form, or CAF.
Right, the CAF. I've heard of that.
Yeah. And on that form, parents get to list at least 3 schools that they would prefer ranked. Then you have the big nail-biting days, national offer days, April 16th for primary, March 1st for secondary. That's when everyone finds out.
Wow, okay. Big dates. But what if you move house halfway through the year or need a place outside that main intake?
Good question. That falls under in-year admissions. It's a bit of a different process. And another key thing to get your head around is who's actually making the admission authority.
Ah, right. It's not always the same body.
No. For community schools and voluntary controlled ones, it's usually the local authority, the council. But for foundation schools, voluntary aided academies, free schools, the decision often lies with the school's governors or the academy trust itself.
Okay, so it depends on the type of school. Got it. And the million-dollar question, I suppose. What happens if loads of people apply to one popular school, more kids than places?
Right. That's where oversubscription criteria kick in. Every school has a published admission number, the PAN, which is basically its limit for that year group. If they get more applications than the PAN, they have to use a set list of criteria to decide who gets offered a place.
And what sort of criteria are we talking about?
Well, common ones are, like living in the catchment area, having a brother or sister already at the school, the sibling rule, and sometimes if it's really close, how far you live from the school gate can be the tiebreaker. And of course, faith schools might prioritize kids from families of their faith.
Okay, so there's a clear pecking order, or there should be. Let's talk more about the local authorities then. Sounds like they juggle quite a bit.
They really do. One of their biggest jobs is making sure there are actually enough school places across their whole area. That means working with all the schools, academies included, trying to predict demand and, plan ahead.
But didn't you say academies make their own decisions? Does that make it tricky?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The government research we looked at pointed this out. As more schools become academies with their own admission rules, it gets harder for the LA to sort of manage the overall picture and guarantee enough places everywhere.
Right, so the LA has the responsibility, but maybe not always the direct control over all the schools. What else are they responsible for?
Well, they set the specific admission policies for the schools they do control, the community ones. And they coordinate the whole application timetable for everyone, setting deadlines, managing the process, whether schools have too few or too many applicants.
Okay.
And crucially, they're the ones who send out the official offer letters on those national offer days.
Mm.
Oh, and they also handle the appeals process if parents aren't happy with the place they've been offered. So yeah, they're pretty central.
The main coordinators, sounds like. And
Mhm.
is there something that makes sure everyone plays fair? A rule book.
Exactly. That's the school
Yeah.
admission code. It's legally binding, applies to all admission authorities, councils, academy trusts, everyone. And it's meant to make sure the whole process is fair, clear, and transparent.
Okay, so that's the theory. But we know it doesn't always feel straightforward. Ramesh Ranganathan's experience really brought that home, didn't it? His posts about his son not getting any of their choices.
Yeah, that really resonated, I think. Especially the bit about not getting into the same secondary school as his older child, despite expecting the sibling rule to count for more.
Mm-hmm.
And his frustration with West Sussex Council, the lack of communication. It just highlights the real emotional impact this has on families. It makes you question how consistently these criteria, like the sibling rule, are actually applied everywhere, especially with different types of schools involved.
Definitely. And it leads back to those challenges for the local authorities, that government research you mentioned. What did the LAs themselves say about dealing with more academies?
Well, it was interesting. Nearly all of them, like 95%, said they work with all schools, whatever their status. But almost half, 47%, were worried that relationships could get worse if more schools convert to academies.
Why is that?
It seems to be a concern that the current ways of working together often rely on, good personal relationships and schools choosing to cooperate. There's a worry that this might be a bit fragile if schools become more independent and aren't formally required to follow the LA's lead on things like admissions or expansions.
So goodwill isn't always enough, basically.
Kind of, especially when it comes to place planning. The LA legally has to make sure there are enough school places. But if more and more schools are academies or free schools, the LA doesn't have the final say on whether they expand or close or change their admission numbers.
Who does then?
Often, it's the regional schools commissioner, they're appointed by central government, who makes the final call for academies. And that decision might not always line up with what the local authority thinks is needed locally.
Right, so the LA holds the responsibility, but not all the power. That sounds like a recipe for, well, problems. What about kids with specific needs, say those with an EHCP, an education, health, and care plan?
Yeah, this is a really crucial area. Legally, schools must admit a child if that school is named on their EHCP.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if they're technically full.
Okay, that sounds clear cut.
It should be. But the research suggests some schools, and LA's reported, this can be more of an issue, with some academies might be, let's say, reluctant to take these children. That puts the LA in a really difficult position, trying to make sure these vulnerable kids get the place they're legally entitled to.
That's really worrying. These are the kids who need that security most.
Absolutely. And everyone agrees you need a joined-up approach, led by the LA, to support vulnerable kids properly. But there are huge hurdles pressure on funding for special needs, needs getting more complex, and schools just having different attitudes towards inclusion. Again, LAs sometimes find this inconsistency harder to manage with academies where they have less direct oversight.
And what about kids needing alternative provision, AP, like if they've been excluded?
Right, so the LA has to fund AP for permanently excluded pupils from the sixth day. Good AP locally often relies on all of the schools in the area working together, sharing responsibility. But like the other partnerships we've talked about, these can be quite fragile. If some schools, maybe the more autonomous ones, aren't fully bought in, the whole system for supporting these kids can suffer.
It really does sound like this central tension, schools wanting independence versus the LA needing to manage the whole system fairly is kind of the main theme here.
I think it is. There are real concerns that with more schools setting their own admission rules, you could end up with a less equitable system overall. Some people argue the LA needs a stronger role in coordinating admissions for all schools to make sure it's a level playing field. The research basically said good relationships are great, but they're not enough on their own. You need clear rules and responsibilities too.
So, given all that complexity, all those challenges, what are the ways forward? How could things be improved? That education software company, the Access Group, they had some ideas, right?
They did, yeah. Mostly focused on using technology, better digital transformation, they called it. Their point is that good digital tools could really streamline things, like much better online application systems for parents, cutting down on all the paperwork for the LAs.
Oh, definitely. Less paperwork sounds like a win-win.
Totally. And better systems mean better data management for the LAs. They can process applications more easily, spot patterns, plan better for future numbers. Plus, improved communication, think automated updates for parents, keeping everyone in the loop.
Yeah, I can see how having better data would help with that big challenge of making sure there are enough places in the right spots.
Exactly. Good digital tools can help forecast trends better, which means the LA can be more proactive about allocating resources. Classrooms, teachers, maybe avoid overcrowding, and a really well-designed system should also help make sure the admission rules are applied fairly and consistently. Transparency is key.
And could these systems talk to each other, like link up with other school records?
Ideally, yes. Integrating admission systems with things like student records or even financial aid could make the whole experience smoother for families and the admin teams.
Okay, so tech offers some solutions. What about other, maybe more structural changes? Did the sources suggest anything else?
Yeah, there were calls for stronger oversight generally. Things like giving LAs a bit more say over all school admissions, not just the ones they directly run, and making sure there's proper consultation if a school wants to change its admission numbers or policies. Better coordination for those in-year admissions was another one, helping families who move mid-year.
Right, because that sounds like it could be a real headache currently. And what about protecting those vulnerable kids we were talking about?
Well, the feeling seems to be about reinforcing collective responsibility, making it clearer that all schools, academies included, along with their trusts and the LA, share the job of looking after vulnerable pupils. With the LA taking a strong lead in coordinating that effort, that's seen as pretty vital for making the whole system more inclusive.
Okay. This has been, well, it's certainly opened my eyes to how much goes on behind the scenes. So, just to try and sum up, school admissions are coordinated locally, but the rise of academies adds a huge layer of complexity. LAs face big challenges ensuring enough places and fair access, especially for kids with extra needs.
Hmm.
Digital tools could help streamline things, but there's also a need for maybe stronger coordination, clearer rules, and getting everyone, all types of schools, to properly share the responsibility.
I think that captures it well. It's a system trying to balance lots of things: what parents want, what schools can offer,
Yeah.
and the need for fairness, especially for vulnerable children. And yeah, that academy factor definitely complicates the LA's job.
Well, hopefully for you, the learner, this deep dive has given you a clearer map of that landscape, the key parts and the tricky bits, without feeling too swamped.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And perhaps, as you think more about this, here's a final thought. Given that tension we discussed between schools having more freedom and the local authority needing to ensure fairness and efficiency for everyone in the community, how do we actually strike the right balance? How can we build a system that genuinely works for all children and families? It's not simple, but definitely worth pondering.